Back in the autumn of 1883, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. The dust of the Navajo nation settled heavy on everything, coating the sparse sagebrush, the rocks, and the scant dwellings scattered across the vast, indifferent landscape. The sun beat down like a relentless hammer through a sky that was bleached pale with heat day after day. For Kia, barely out of childhood but with eyes that held the weight of generations of sorrow, this was simply life. She lived with her Nyali, her grandmother, in a hogan that huddled low against the earth, offering meager shelter from the elements. Her parents were gone, taken by the coughing sickness that had swept through their people 2 winters past. Naali was frail now, her hands gnarled like the roots of ancient cedars, her voice a soft whisper against the wind. Kia was the provider, the gatherer, the silent keeper of their small, shrinking world. Her days were a rhythm of quiet tasks, fetching water from the distant spring, gathering firewood from the dry washes, tending the few meager crops they managed to coax from the unyielding soil. Loneliness was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to her heels like the dust itself. Other families were far off, and the path between them was long and often felt guarded by an invisible wall of shared grief and the struggle for survival. The world beyond their mesas and canyons felt vast and dangerous, a place of iron horses that screamed across the plains, and people who looked at her and her Nali with suspicion or outright contempt. Kia had learned to be quiet, to be watchful. The encroachment of the railroad, a scar of metal across the sacred land, brought strangers, noise, and disruption. They spoke a language she barely understood, their motives even less so. They saw the land as something to be conquered, divided, used. They did not see the stories etched into the canyons, the spirits whispered on the wind, the deep connection that bound her people to this place since time began. She had seen enough to know that the world of the Dine Azjan, the Navajo woman, was shrinking, hemmed in by forces she could not comprehend, let alone fight. Her stasis was one of quiet endurance, a life lived in the long shadow of loss and the ever-present threat of more. One sweltering afternoon, later in the autumn than the heat had any right to be, Kia was searching for edible roots on the lower slopes of a mesa she rarely visited. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. A strange stillness hung in the air, heavier than the usual dust. Then she saw it. A dark shape crumpled near a heap of rocks, not far from the relatively new scar of the iron road. Caution, a lesson etched deep by hard years, tightened in her gut. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the silent landscape. No horses, no other figures. Just the shape, unmoving. Curiosity, another human instinct, warred with her caution. What could it be? Not animal, too large, too still. Not one of her people, no familiar blankets or clothing. She crept closer, her soft moccasins making barely a sound on the dry earth. As she drew near, the shape resolved into a man. A white man. His clothes were fine, or had been once, made of materials she only saw on the wealthiest traders in the infrequent time she visited the small, dusty settlement near the railroad tracks. Now they were torn, covered in dust and what looked like dried blood. His face was pale beneath the grime, slick with sweat. He lay awkwardly, one leg twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle. Panic, sharp and sudden, pricked at her. A white man, injured, alone. This was trouble. The stories whispered among her people were full of trouble brought by white men. But then she saw his chest rise and fall, shallow, ragged breaths. He was alive, barely, and he was suffering. The image of her Nali, weak and needing care, flashed in her mind. The inherent need to help another living being, regardless of who they were, rooted itself deeper than her fear. She swallowed hard, pushing down the instinct to flee. He was dying, and for now, she was the only one there. She approached him slowly, cautiously. He groaned, a low, painful sound that tore at something inside her. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glazed with pain and fever. They were blue, startlingly bright against his pallor. He mumbled something she couldn't understand, a string of harsh, foreign sounds. Shil Hajo, she murmured, the traditional Navajo greeting, unsure if he could hear, unsure if it mattered. It was all she had. He needed water. He needed shelter. He needed care she didn't know how to give a man like him, a man who looked like he belonged to the world that was slowly crushing hers. But she couldn't leave him there to die, not alone, like this. Not while she had water in her small skin, not while her Nali's Hogan offered a roof, however humble. The catalyst had arrived, not with a roar, but a broken whisper and a body on the ground, forcing her out of the quiet stasis of her grief and routine, presenting her with a stark, impossible choice. Moving him was the hardest thing Kia had ever done. He was heavy, a dead weight even when he stirred. She managed to get some water to his lips from her skin, holding his head gently. His eyes closed again, the brief flicker of consciousness gone. His skin was burning to the touch. Using all her strength, she dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, towards the shelter of an overhang, then eventually, painstakingly, back towards the faint smudge on the horizon that was her Nali's home. It took hours, the sun dipping below the horizon and plunging the world into the sudden chill of the desert night, before she got him close. Naali, seeing the struggle from afar, hobbled out, a small, frail figure against the darkening sky. Her eyes, ancient and knowing, took in the scene. They rested on the injured man, then on Kia's determined, dirt-streaked face. There was no accusation, no fear, only a quiet understanding. Together, they somehow managed to get him inside the Hogan. The air was thick with the smell of earth, old smoke, and now, the coppery tang of blood and the scent of fever. He filled the small space with his large, injured presence. His breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle. Kia cleaned his wounds as best she could with water and carefully boiled cloths. His leg was clearly broken, bone angled unnaturally beneath the ripped fabric of his trousers. She knew nothing of setting bones, only of poultices for wounds and herbs for fever. For days, he hovered on the edge of life. Kia and Nali worked tirelessly, their actions a quiet, rhythmic dance of care. Kia brewed teas from plants Nali instructed her to gather, carefully dripping the liquid between his parched lips. She changed the dressings on his wounds, her small hands gentle and steady despite her fear. Nali spoke soft words over him in Navajo, ancient blessings and healing prayers. He remained largely unconscious, muttering sometimes in his fevered state, words that meant nothing to them but carried the sharp edge of distress. Initial interactions were purely functional, born of necessity. Kia spoke little, tending to his needs with a quiet efficiency. Nali observed him with a calm, assessing gaze, her presence a grounding force. Mistrust was a silent, unseen guest in the Hogan. Kia had been raised on caution regarding the white world. Its power felt overwhelming, its intentions often cruel. This man, even in his broken state, represented that world. Why was he here? Who was he? Would helping him bring more trouble to their door? He was Mr. Nathaniel Vance, though they did not know his name then. A man whose name was synonymous with ambition, with steel rails spanning continents, with wealth beyond measure. He had been on a private car, heading west to oversee a new line, when something had gone terribly wrong, a sabotage, an accident he couldn't remember. He only remembered pain, confusion, and the vast empty sky above him before darkness claimed him. Now, in his fevered dreams, he was a boy again, lost and afraid, or back in the cutthroat world of business, facing enemies whose faces blurred with the pain in his leg. Gradually, agonizingly, slowly, the fever broke. His eyes, when they finally opened and stayed open, were clearer, though still clouded with pain and confusion. He looked around the Hogan, his gaze lingering on the packed earth walls, the central fire pit, the quiet figures of the young woman and the old one who tended him. He tried to speak, but his voice was a dry rasp. Kia offered him water in a small clay cup. He drank greedily. "Where?" he croaked, his voice rough. Kia shook her head, indicating she didn't understand. She pointed to herself. "Kia," she said softly. She pointed to Nali. "Nali." He stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes sharp despite his weakness. Recognition, slow and dawning, touched his features. He was in a Navajo Hogan. He was being cared for by Navajo women. The people his railroad displaced, the people his world ignored or steamrolled over. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, surprise perhaps, or dawning comprehension. Over the next few weeks, a fragile bridge began to form between them, built not of words, but of shared vulnerability and quiet acts. Kia tended to his needs, the tasks mundane but essential, bringing him food she had prepared, carefully rewrapping his injured leg, helping him shift positions when the pain became unbearable. He watched her, his initial arrogance stripped away by his helplessness. He saw her quiet strength, her tireless work, the way she cared for her Nali with such gentle devotion. He saw the poverty of their existence, stark and undeniable, yet delivered without complaint. He tried communicating, using gestures, pointing to the broken leg, mimicking a train whistle to ask what happened. Kia understood some, little by little. She conveyed, through broken English, gleaned from rare trips to the trading post and simple hand signs, that she had found him near the track. He gestured towards his clothes, the torn pockets, indicating robbery, maybe attack. He learned her name, Naali's name. He learned about the rhythm of their days, dictated by the sun and the needs of the land. He saw her resilience up close, a young woman shouldering burdens that would crush many men, doing so with a quiet dignity that humbled him. He, the man who commanded empires, was utterly dependent on the kindness of this girl from a world he had barely acknowledged existed, except as an obstacle or a resource. He found himself sharing, slowly, haltingly, details of his own life, using simple words, gesturing. He pointed west, drawing a line with his finger, mimicking the puff of smoke from an engine. Railroad. He pointed to himself, then mimicked writing, signing papers. His hand shook. His world was one of noise and speed and countless faces. This Hogan was silence, punctuated only by the wind and Naali's soft breathing. Kia listened, not always understanding the words, but sensing the weight behind them. He spoke of building, of connecting places, of making things happen. He also spoke, in quieter moments prompted by the vast, star-filled night sky, visible through the smoke hole, of loneliness. Of a life driven by ambition that had left little room for connection, for family. He confessed, haltingly, a deep regret, a sense of emptiness that his wealth had never filled. His voice was raw, vulnerable, different from the commanding tone she sometimes heard him use, even weakly. She, in turn, shared, not with many words, but through glances, small actions. She showed him a picture of her parents, kept carefully wrapped in cloth. She spoke their names, her voice soft with loss. She showed him the small patch of corn she tended, explaining how the rain was needed. She told him of her fear of the future, of not being able to care for Naali, of the world changing too fast. One evening, after Kia had carefully changed his bandages, she sat by the dying fire. The pain in his leg was a dull throb, but his mind was clear. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a nameless native girl, but as Kia, the person who had saved him, who cared for him with selfless dedication. "Kia," he said, his voice stronger now, though still weak, "thank you." She met his gaze, her dark eyes steady. A faint, shy smile touched her lips. "You are welcome," she replied, using one of the few English phrases she knew that felt right. In that quiet exchange, something shifted. The wall of us and them, built so high by history and prejudice, lowered a little. He saw her humanity, her strength, her quiet grace. She saw past the Tycoon, the symbol of the encroaching world, to the man, broken and vulnerable, capable of gratitude and perhaps introspection. They had become, in this small, isolated space, two people sharing a fragile, essential connection, bound by her act of kindness and his dependence. But the outside world did not forget Mr. Nathaniel Vance. Rumors of his disappearance spread like wildfire through the newspapers back east. His company offered a large reward. And those who wished him harm, or who simply saw an opportunity, began to search. The railroad tracks, that symbol of his power, also became a beacon guiding the searchers. One morning, Kia was drawing water when she saw dust on the horizon. Too much dust for natural wind, too much for a small group, riders, several of them, heading in their direction. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the quiet warmth that had begun to grow in the Hogan. She ran back, bursting into the Hogan, her chest heaving. "Riders!" she gasped, pointing. "Many riders, coming here!" Nathaniel, who was now able to sit up with effort, his legs splinted with pieces of wood she had found and bound with strips of hide, went pale. He knew they would come. He just hadn't expected them so soon. "Who?" he asked urgently. "Do you know them?" Kia shook her head, her eyes wide with alarm. "Strangers. Like you, but hard faces." She had seen those faces before, in the settlement, in the eyes of men who saw her as less than human. Nali, calm despite the urgency, spoke softly in Navajo. Kia translated quickly. Nali says, "Maybe they look for you. Maybe bad men." Nathaniel looked at the old woman, then at Kia. He was a burden, a danger to them. He had brought the outside world's conflict to their doorstep. Guilt twisted in his gut. He was helpless to protect them. "You must hide me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Hide me. If they find me here, they will hurt you. They will think you took me or stole from me." Kia didn't hesitate. The thought of abandoning him didn't cross her mind. He was under her roof, her care. It was her responsibility now. And she knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that these riders were a threat not just to him, but to their fragile peace, to their very existence in this remote place. There was an old storage cellar dug into the earth nearby, used for keeping food cool and dry. It was small, dark, and musty. They helped Nathaniel hobble towards it, supporting his weight. Getting him down the rough steps was agonizing, each movement sending jolts of pain through his leg. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. Kia laid blankets for him inside, gave him a skin of water and some dried meat. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her eyes conveying the seriousness. "I will try. Make them go." He grasped her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Kia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Be careful." She nodded, pulling her hand away. Nali stood beside the hogan, her face impassive. Kia took a deep breath, trying to calm her pounding heart. She grabbed a small basket, pretending she was gathering roots, and walked slowly away from the hogan and the hidden cellar, towards the direction the riders were coming from, hoping to intercept them, to draw their attention away. There were 4 of them, hard-looking men on dusty horses. They wore pistols strapped to their hips. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, reined in his horse as he saw Kia. "Hey girl," he called out, his voice rough and dismissive. "You seen anyone out here? A white man, injured?" Kia stopped, keeping her basket low, her face carefully blank. She understood the words white man and injured. She shook her head slowly. "Don't lie to me, squaw," another man sneered. There was a wreck. A rich man's missing. He wouldn't just vanish in the dust. "Only wind," Kia said, using one of her few full English phrases. She pointed towards the vast empty landscape. "Nobody." The scarred man narrowed his eyes, looking past her towards the hogan. "That your place?" he asked, jerking his chin towards it. Kia nodded. Nali had retreated inside, as planned. "Anyone else there?" he pressed. Kia hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Only Nali," she said, using the Navajo word, hoping it would confuse them or seem insignificant. The men exchanged glances. "An old squaw and a girl?" one of them muttered. "Hardly a hideout." "Let's check anyway," the scarred man said. "Maybe he crawled off somewhere and they took him in. Get the reward." His eyes flickered over Kia, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. This wasn't just about the reward. There was malice there, the easy contempt of those who felt superior. This was the climax. The external threat was here, standing before her, fueled by greed and prejudice. She had a choice: lead them away, potentially putting herself in danger, or let them approach the hogan and find Nathaniel, endangering him and Naili. She had to draw them off, she thought quickly. The spring. It was a long ride, but it was a plausible place for someone injured and desperate for water to try and reach. Kia pointed away towards a different mesa, a direction away from her home. "Water," she said, mimicking drinking. "Maybe go that way, look for water." The scarred man followed her gesture. It was a long shot, a desperate guess, but it was a possibility. He considered her, her small size, the apparent innocence in her blank face, though her heart was a drum against her ribs. She didn't seem like she could have moved a man like Vance, let alone hidden him. "All right," he said, making a decision. "We'll check the spring. You stay put, girl. Don't go nowhere." It was a threat, thinly veiled. Kia watched them ride away, a knot of fear loosening slightly in her stomach, only to be replaced by a fresh wave of anxiety. How long would they be gone? Would they find anything? Would they believe her? She waited until their dust was just a faint cloud on the horizon before running back to the hogan. She went to the cellar door. "They are gone," she called down softly. "They ride away." A moment later, Nathaniel emerged, pale and sweating, his leg throbbing. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "They didn't hurt you?" "I am well," Kia replied, relief making her own voice shaky. "They believe I see nothing." Nathaniel looked at her small, brave figure. She had faced down dangerous men, potentially saving his life again, risking her own and Nali's. A profound sense of gratitude and respect washed over him. He had built an empire on calculation and leverage. Kia had acted purely out of compassion and courage. His world suddenly felt small and hollow compared to the quiet strength she possessed. The riders did not return that day, nor the next. They had apparently taken Kia's suggestion seriously and were searching elsewhere, or had perhaps given up the immediate search in that area. The tension remained, a taut string vibrating in the air, but the immediate threat had passed thanks to Kia's quick thinking and bravery. As days turned into weeks, Nathaniel slowly began to heal. His leg, though crookedly set, started to bear some weight. He could move around the hogan, sit outside in the sun, watch Kia and Nali in their daily routines. He learned more phrases in Navajo, Kia more in English. They talked, truly talked, not just about needs, but about their lives, their dreams, their fears. The language barrier, once a wall, became a challenge they both embraced, a way to learn about each other's worlds. Nathaniel told her about the cities he had built, the ships he owned, the vast networks of steel and commerce he commanded. He spoke of the relentless drive that had consumed his life, leaving him rich but empty. He admitted the ruthlessness that had been necessary to reach the top, and in the quiet of the hogan, under Kia's steady gaze, he seemed to see the cost of it for the first time. He spoke of his family, distant and fractured by his ambition. Kia spoke of her people, their history, their connection to the land, the pain of their displacement, and the struggle to hold onto their identity. She shared her grief for her parents, her deep love for Nayali, her quiet determination to survive and protect the one she had left. She spoke of the beauty she saw in the harsh landscape, the stories in the stars, the peace she found in the ancient ways. Their bond deepened, a quiet understanding that transcended their vastly different backgrounds. He admired her strength, her resilience, her innate goodness. She saw past the wealth and power to the man who had been broken and remade, humbled by circumstance and her kindness. One crisp morning, weeks after he had arrived, a lone rider appeared. This time, he did not look like the others. He wore a well-tailored suit and rode a fine horse. Kia tensed, but Nathaniel recognized him immediately. "Mr. Callahan," Nathaniel called out, his voice rough with disuse. "Over here." The man, Mr. Callahan, a trusted associate, spurred his horse forward. He dismounted, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw Nathaniel, thin, bearded, leaning on a makeshift crutch outside a Navajo hogan. "Mr. Vance, you're alive," Callahan exclaimed, relief and shock warring on his face. We feared the worst." He looked from Nathaniel to Kia and Naali, his expression shifting to one of confusion and thinly veiled suspicion. Nathaniel saw the look. He saw the prejudice in Callahan's eyes, the assumption that these women had somehow harmed him or were holding him. He wouldn't allow it. "Callahan," Nathaniel said, his voice clear and strong despite his weakness. He stood as tall as he could, leaning heavily on the crutch. "These women saved my life. Found me dying near the tracks, brought me here, nursed me back from the brink. They asked for nothing, expected nothing. They are my saviors." Callahan was taken aback by the force in his employer's voice. His suspicion didn't vanish entirely, but deference to Mr. Vance's word was deeply ingrained. Preparations were made for Nathaniel's return. Callahan arranged for a proper doctor to be brought out, for a special train car. As the time approached for him to leave, Kia felt a familiar ache of loss begin to settle in her chest. She had opened her small world to this man, shared her quiet life, and now he was returning to his vast, loud one. The morning of his departure was cool and clear. The train waited some distance away, a monstrous iron beast on the horizon. Nathaniel, dressed in clean clothes Callahan had brought, though still favoring his leg, stood outside the hogan. Nali offered him a small, intricately woven basket, a gift of thanks. He accepted it with genuine reverence. He turned to Kia, his blue eyes holding a depth she hadn't seen before. He took her hand, his grip firm. "Kia," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. He hesitated, searching for the right words, words that could encompass weeks of shared silence, quiet care, and unspoken understanding. You showed me more kindness than anyone in my life, more strength, more worth. He looked towards the distant train, then back at her. That world, it takes. It rarely gives like you did. He squeezed her hand. What you did, it changed me, reminded me of what matters. He looked at her earnest face, the eyes that had watched over him so diligently. I cannot repay you for saving my life, but I can try to honor the life you saved. He lowered his voice further, his words barely a whisper against the wind. I will ensure you and Nali are cared for, secure. You will have a home, a good life, opportunity. He paused, his gaze searching hers. But more than that, I want you to have your voice heard, your strength recognized. I will establish a trust in your name, for you and for your people. To help them, to preserve their ways, their land. His voice grew stronger, filled with a sudden, fierce determination. You will manage it. You will decide how it is used. You, Kia, the one who understands what is truly valuable. He pressed something small and metallic into her hand, a simple locket, inscribed with a single word in English, resilience. This is yours, he said, a reminder of your strength and of my promise. The promise he whispered changed her life, not just because it offered security and means, but because it recognized her. It didn't seek to erase who she was, but to empower her within her own world, using his influence to build bridges, not walls. It was an acknowledgement that the girl in the dust held a wisdom and strength that his vast empire had never taught him. Kia looked at the locket in her palm, then back at Mr. Vance. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring his image. It wasn't just the promise of money, of ease. It was the understanding, the respect, the acknowledgement of her humanity, her worth, by a man from the very world that had sought to diminish it. Go now, Naali urged softly in Navajo. His world waits. Nathaniel Vance stepped away, leaning on his crutch. He looked at Kia and Nali standing together, two figures rooted in the vast, silent landscape. He felt a pang, a strange sense of belonging to this quiet place, and these two women that he had never felt in the gilded cages of his own world. He turned and began the slow, hobbling walk towards the waiting train. Kia and Naali watched until he was a small figure beside the roaring iron beast, swallowed by smoke and the noise of his departure. In the aftermath, life did not change overnight. The fear of the riders lingered for a time, but then letters arrived, carried by a trusted messenger from Mr. Callahan. And soon, tangible proof of Nathaniel Vance's promise began to materialize. Land was quietly secured, held in trust. Funds were allocated. And Kia, guided by Nali's wisdom and her own quiet determination, began the difficult, unprecedented task of managing the resources Mr. Vance had entrusted to her. The whisper had indeed changed her life forever. She was no longer just a girl living in the shadow of loss and fear, her world shrinking. She was Kia, keeper of a new kind of hope, bridging two worlds, using the unexpected gift from the man she saved to build a future for her people, a future rooted in their past but reaching towards possibility. She faced skepticism, prejudice, and immense challenges, but she carried the locket, the word resilience, a constant reminder of the strength that lay within her. The strength a dying Tycoon had recognized in the dust of the Navajo nation, and had chosen to honor above all else. Her life was still hard, the path uncertain, but she walked it with a quiet purpose she had never known before, a purpose born from an act of simple kindness that blossomed into something profound and enduring. She had found, not just survival, but a way to honor the past by building a future, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, connection and hope could take root and flourish.